The kitchen timer was the only sound in Dorothy Fletcher's farmhouse that Tuesday evening, its gentle ticking reminding her that even at 73 years old, she still had purpose. The cinnamon rolls rising on the counter would be ready soon, their sweet aroma mixing with the wood smoke from her fireplace. Outside, the first snowflakes of what weathermen were calling the worst blizzard in Montana's history began their silent descent. Dorothy moved slowly to the window, her arthritic hands clutching the lace curtains her late husband Thomas had hung 40 years ago. The wind was already picking up, bending the old pines that lined her property like worried guardians. She'd been a widow for 7 years now, and nights like this reminded her how alone she truly was. Their daughter lived in Seattle with her family, too busy with corporate meetings to visit more than once a year. The farm that once bustled with life and laughter now felt like a museum of memories. The roar of motorcycle engines cut through the howling wind. Dorothy's heart quickened as she peered into the growing darkness. 15 motorcycles, their headlights cutting through the swirling snow like knives, pulled into her long driveway. Even from a distance, she could see the patches on their leather jackets. She'd lived in Montana long enough to know what those symbols meant. These were Hell's Angels, and they were heading straight for her front porch. Every reasonable voice in her head screamed, "Danger. Lock the doors. Call the sheriff. Pretend you're not home." But Dorothy had spent 7 decades learning to listen to a different voice, the one that sounded remarkably like Thomas, reminding her that scared people were still people, and cold was cold regardless of who was feeling it. She opened the door before they could knock. The man in front was massive, his beard covered in ice crystals, his face red from the brutal wind. Behind him, 14 others stood shivering, their tough exteriors no match for nature's fury. The leader pulled off his glove and extended a trembling hand. "My name's Jake Brennan, ma'am." His voice was rough but respectful. "Our bikes can't make it through this storm. We saw your lights. We're not here to cause trouble. We just need shelter until this passes. We can sleep in your barn, anywhere really. We won't bother you." Dorothy looked at their faces, really looked. Beneath the tattoos and leather, she saw sons. Beneath the rough edges, she saw fear. One of the younger men was shaking so badly his teeth chattered. Another had his arm around a buddy who looked barely conscious from the cold. "The barn hasn't had heat in 5 years, Dorothy said simply. "You'll freeze to death out there. Come inside." The bikers exchanged glances of disbelief. Jake's eyes glistened with something that might have been tears or might have been melting snow. "Mom, there's 15 of us. Then we'd better get you all in quickly before my heat escapes." What followed was a scene Dorothy would replay in her mind 1,000 times. 15 leather-clad bikers, some covered in scars and tattoos that told stories of hard lives, filed into her modest farmhouse with the reverence of people entering a church. They removed their boots without being asked, stacking them neatly by the door. They spoke in hushed voices as if afraid to disturb the peace of her home. Dorothy moved into action with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. She pulled every blanket from every closet. She made pot after pot of coffee. She brought out those cinnamon rolls and then watched hardened men's eyes light up like children on Christmas morning. When she ran out of store, bought food, she started cooking everything she had: pasta, soup, sandwiches, anything to warm these frozen souls. Jake helped her in the kitchen, his huge hands surprisingly gentle as he sliced bread. The others spread throughout her living room, some sleeping sitting up so others could lie on the couch. One man named Marcus pulled out a harmonica and played soft, mournful blues that made Dorothy think of Thomas. Another called Eric showed her pictures of his daughter, who looked about 7, her gap-toothed smile full of innocence. "We're not all monsters, you know," Eric said quietly. "Some of us just got lost somewhere along the way." Dorothy patted his hand with her wrinkled one. "We all get lost sometimes, dear. The trick is finding our way back." As the storm raged outside, something remarkable happened inside that farmhouse. Stories were shared. Jake talked about his brother who died in Afghanistan. A biker named Carlos spoke about his mother who worked 3 jobs to raise him. Another named Tommy admitted he was riding away from a life that had gone wrong, hoping to find a place to start over. Dorothy listened to each story with the full attention that had made her such a beloved teacher before retirement. She didn't judge. She didn't preach. She just saw them, really saw them, perhaps for the first time in their lives, without fear or prejudice clouding someone's vision. Around midnight, Jake found her in the kitchen preparing yet another pot of coffee. "Mom, why are you doing this for us? You don't know us. We could be dangerous." Dorothy turned to him with eyes that had seen war, depression, loss, and still chose hope. "When my Thomas was dying of cancer, strangers helped us. People brought food. mowed our lawn, sat with him so I could sleep. They didn't know us well, but they knew we were human and we were hurting. She paused, her voice growing stronger. Tonight, you were hurting. Tomorrow, maybe you'll help someone else. That's how kindness works. It doesn't end, it just keeps moving forward. The storm lasted through the night and into the next morning. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, the world outside was buried in 4 feet of pristine snow. Dorothy made a huge breakfast, her kitchen filled with the sounds of men laughing and the smell of bacon and eggs. As they prepared to leave, Jake pulled her aside. "We want to repay you somehow." Dorothy shook her head. "Just be kind to someone else who needs it. That's payment enough." The bikers left around noon, their engines roaring to life, their waves lingering as they disappeared down her plowed driveway. Dorothy stood on her porch, feeling more alive than she had in years, unaware that Jake had made several phone calls that morning. The next day, Dorothy woke to an impossible sight. 100 black SUVs lined her property, wrapping around her farmhouse like a protective embrace. Men and women in leather jackets were everywhere, but this time they weren't seeking shelter. They were providing it. Jake stood at her door with tears streaming down his face. "You gave 15 strangers shelter when you had every reason to fear us. Now you're family. No family of ours lives alone in a broken down farmhouse." What followed was extraordinary. The bikers had organized their entire national network. Contractors, carpenters, plumbers, and electricians, all members or friends of the club, descended on her property. They rebuilt her barn. They fixed her roof. They updated her plumbing and electrical systems. They stocked her pantry with enough food for a year. They set up a fund to cover her property taxes and medical expenses for life. But more than the physical repairs, they gave her something more precious. They adopted her as their official club grandmother. Suddenly, Dorothy had hundreds of surrogate children who called regularly, visited often, and made sure she never spent another holiday alone. Local news picked up the story. Social media exploded with images of tough bikers treating an elderly woman with tender respect. The tale spread across America, a reminder that kindness can come from unexpected places, and that labels don't define souls. 1 year later, Dorothy stood in that same kitchen, now modernized but still smelling of cinnamon rolls. The house overflowed with visitors, bikers and their families celebrating what they called Dorothy Day. Children played in her yard. Men who once looked dangerous now looked devoted as they hung on her every word. Jake found her watching from the window, the same window where she'd first seen those headlights in the snow. "You changed our lives, Grandma Dorothy." She smiled, her eyes bright. "No, dear, you changed mine. I just opened a door, you opened your hearts." In a world that often feels cold and divided, Dorothy Fletcher's story reminds us that warmth exists not in buildings but in souls, that courage sometimes looks like an old woman opening her door, and that the most powerful thing any of us can do is choose kindness when fear seems safer. One act of compassion during a Montana blizzard created ripples that touched thousands of lives, proving that love doesn't ask who deserves it. Love just gives. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to Pure Kindness Stories. Share it with someone who needs a reminder that goodness still exists in unexpected places. Because somewhere tonight, someone needs shelter from their storm, and you might be the one who can open the door. Be someone's Dorothy. Be someone's angel. Just be kind.